What's up, everybody? This is John with Archer Film. Thanks to all my subscribers. Please like, share, comment. I do read all the comments. And thanks for following along on this film journey of ours. So I'm going to say best fantasy sci-fi series ever, okay? And it's down to 3. Let's be honest. There's only 3 series that even compete. So we have Star Wars, obviously. We have Lord of the Rings. And we have Harry Potter. I grew up with Star Wars. Those were my jam, the prequels, all that stuff. Lord of the Rings, I was a huge Peter Jackson fan before Lord of the Rings came out. I've been following his career. I owned a lot of his more obscure things. I thought he was an incredible filmmaker before this. So when it was announced that he was going to do this, I was on board. I also used to love the cartoon Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit back in the day. So I was really excited about those sort of forces teaming up, and it did not disappoint, obviously. And then we got Harry Potter. I was kind of late to the show for Harry Potter, but when I did get into it, I really enjoyed it, and I watch it like once a year. Now, the first 2 I can kind of skip for Harry Potter because they're like kids' movies, but I will watch all the other ones because it is a blast. So we're going to start with Star Wars. The original trilogy, if you watch them now, it can be a little slow in moments. There's some really slow points, when the droids are walking across the desert, things like that. But the story's still there. It's very tight. It's got a great ending, great climax, and obviously it's the Joseph Campbell hero story perfectly. Empire Strikes Back, one of the best in any entry, mostly because it has a down ending, and when you realize, the Luke and Vader relationship, which everyone kind of knows at this point, but if you saw that in the theaters or you had no idea going into it what was going on, it is incredibly powerful. Return of the Jedi, it's a mixed bag. It's really fun adventure. There's some bad parts like the Ewoks and stuff like that, but the fight scene and the climax of 3 films is epic. It is fantastic. It's well done. It's very powerful. It is the redemption of Darth Vader, and it kills it. Now the prequels came after, and I kind of prefer to watch them in that way as well. And I love the prequels. I've said this before. I love Phantom Menace. Except for Jar Jar. I loved Attack of the Clones, except for a couple moments. And I love Revenge of the Sith. It is so powerful. It is 6 films climaxing. It is the greatest villain in film history, in my opinion, because we got to see why and where he came from and the events and the actions of other people and how that affected him. And I think it's great. I think he's the greatest villain in cinema history. So Star Wars is up there for me. It's something I watch every year, and I love it. Next, we're going to do the Harry Potter series. So I was late to that, like I said, and the first 2, they're like kids' movies, but they're really well done, and they're really smart. It's not just good and evil and all these magical things, but I think it's the first one at the end that they get extra points for standing up, for Neville standing up to them. The whole standing up to your friends is harder to do. And I thought that was very unique for a kid's movie, and I thought it showed an insight from J.K. Rowling. I'm like, that is absolutely brilliant, and it always gets me every time I watch it. And each film subsequently gets darker and more complex as the characters grow up and they start dealing with these interpersonal relationships with each other and their feelings for each other, their hormones. That element gets really funny. Their sort of dedication to each other starts to solidify and some of the other characters around them. And each story gets darker by the time you get to Goblet of Fire. And when Shovelface dies, spoilers, Robert Pattinson's character, you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. When it goes to that cemetery and you finally see Voldemort for the first time, he is wicked. Ralph Fiennes kills it. It is dark, it is twisted, and when a boy dies, you're like, oh man, I'm on board for this. So you start to get away from the fact that it's just a kid's story and more like a young adult story. And I loved it. And from that film, all of them are really good, but each film gets darker, more complex, more complicated. And by the time we get to the ending, it is just, you feel like you've lived an entire life, and it's fantastic. My only problems with the very end is they kind of set up this self-sacrifice thing, from the first one. Ron Weasley sacrifices himself during the chess game. And later on, you just sort of suspect that, Obviously, Snape sacrificed himself, Dumbledore sacrificed himself. But you get a sense that Harry Potter had to do it. Like, people are dropping like flies by the time we get to the end. And the thing about a villain like Darth Vader, when we first see him in Star Wars, is we see how powerful he is, how deadly he is. Like, he seems impossible to beat. And every time Luke goes up against him, including up to Empire, he loses pathetically because Darth Vader is way too powerful. That is fascinating to me. Same with Voldemort. So I really wanted the sacrifice element to play out in the Harry Potter films. And they kind of... They kind of keep reiterating that, like, only one of them can survive. They're both linked together. If one dies, they both die. All these things. And you're like, oh, my God, this is it. So I really wanted that to happen. And the way the story unfolded, I think just a better way to tell it is when Hagrid is carrying Harry. We know that Harry's alive. But the rest of the cast doesn't. And, Neville stands up and all that stuff. But I thought it would have been way more powerful if we thought that he was dead too, because that would play into the whole theme. We're like, oh my God, Harry's dead. Hagrid brings him, and that's going to enrage everyone else, and they're all going to, band together and all this stuff and, defeat Voldemort or whatever. So I just thought that one little moment, like, Harry should have died. I think it would have been more powerful. But whatever. It's still a great series. I still watch it every year. So Harry Potter. Also, Harry Potter... It may have my vote over Star Wars because it has 8 films. And honestly, like, 8 films and each one gets better and better. That's pretty spectacular. Like, cinema-wise, film-wise, directing, everything, every element of those films just gets better and better. And they're just beautifully shot. So as far as like Star Wars goes, let's say Star Wars has 6 great movies. This one has, 8, I think. Obviously 2 are kids' movies. So Harry Potter kind of has the edge over Star Wars just because of that. Now, again, Harry Potter does not exist without Star Wars. It's very similar in, if you look at the first episode, it's very similar in the hero's journey. Harry Potter doesn't know he's special. He comes from an average world. There's a magical world, on the horizon, blah, blah, blah. So very similar to the hero's journey in Star Wars. So Harry Potter can't exist without it. But Harry Potter has more movies that I think are just better quality movies than the Star Wars. I know that's controversial. Now, I love Star Wars, and I think the prequels are great, but I do think that Harry Potter, as the better series, has the edge. Now, here's the other series that I think is better than both of them, and there's only 3 of them. And yes, I'm talking about Lord of the Rings. Now, I was a huge Peter Jackson fan before Lord of the Rings. I had followed his career. I owned a lot of his more obscure things. Heavenly Creatures is one of my favorite movies because of the emotional content and the thematic elements. But as a director and as a creative person and storyteller, I could not wait for the marriage of those two. I watched the cartoons when I was a kid, of Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, knew Peter Jackson, so him doing a live-action version, I knew it was going to be great, and he didn't disappoint. And it's his use of miniatures, his models, mixed with CGI, and his shooting style that made this so good. Now, what's incredible about this is each one is a standalone movie that doesn't really make you feel, like, oh, it's a cliffhanger. Kind of the second one, but each one ends pretty good and with a decent little climax where you look forward to the next one, but you don't feel cheated. The Harry Potters did the same thing. They're really good at that too. But in Lord of the Rings, what I think this sets this series out from all the other ones is, now people have criticized, it's just people walking, going from point A to point B, end of movie. And I think that's a very lazy way of looking at it, because the character development and what they have to go through, it's more like a metaphor for life in general. And for me, the first one is fantastic. It sets the stage for everything. The way Peter Jackson shot all the different stuff is fantastic. Now, the Two Towers, there's lots of kind of slower moments, lots of talking tree moments, but then you have Gollum, and it's fantastic watching Andy Serkis play Gollum. It just kind of like he's funny, he's unpredictable, and it's just a fantastic story element. But by the time we get to Return of the King, now the movie's been criticized for its multiple endings, but I think on an epic like that, you kind of have to end it like that. And also, like, it doesn't bother me in the least. And what doesn't bother me the reason why is our hero, Frodo, fails in his mission. Now, he's sacrificed a lot. People have died and given their lives and sacrificed their health, their happiness, and all these things. And by the time we get to the end, the power of the evil, the power of the ring is too much. And I think that is a very powerful thematic element, that Frodo actually fails in his quest. You know, he's in Mount Doom, and, you know, he, instead of throwing the ring in, you know, he hesitates, and, you know, Gollum jumps on him. The power, you know, obviously the power of the ring is too much for Gollum. He jumps on him, bites his finger, all that stuff. And he kind of loses, you know, like Frodo loses because of that hesitation, because the power of the ring had been wearing him down this whole time. And I think that's a very incredible way to end the series. It's not just that, but by the time he gets home, Frodo is so scarred by the things he's gone through and by his failure and everyone that he's lost, that he chooses to go basically with the elves to die. Like, that's what that is at the end. Like, he can't stay with his friends. He can't stay in the regular world. He can't stay in Hobbiton that he loves. Like, he basically gives himself up to the other side. He's so depressed and affected by what happened, by the journey itself, that he's got nothing left to give and decides to die. I mean, I think that is, like, powerful, that he kind of fails at the end. That ending is very, very sad. Like the moment when everyone bows down to them gets me choked up every single time, you know, because they know that they just did so much and risked so much and sacrificed so much, and ultimately, you know, kind of lost, but kind of won, you know, just because the ring was destroyed. And when everyone bows down to them, oh, gets me every time. So I thought that was powerful. And of course, the very ending, it's like, it just is like a gut punch. And, you know, then the movie's over. And I thought that was great. It was very complex. You know, you kind of get the true king there in Viggo's character, but the main character kind of lost, and it's sad and depressing. And again, you know, like, I loved Harry Potter series. I think because it has the most great movies, it is definitely up there. Star Wars is one of my favorites of all time. It's got the greatest villain and the greatest villain arc of all time. But because that's the thing with Lord of the Rings, like, the villain Sauron is not very interesting. You know, like, it's not, you know, the eye in the sky and all that stuff, and like the backstory. It's cool and it keeps the story going, but it's not nearly as interesting as, you know, Darth Vader or even Voldemort. And Voldemort, too, is like, oh, he was always evil. So Darth Vader, to me, still is the better villain. He's more powerful and more complex and conflicted. And, you know, so that's it. Those are my sort of thoughts on those three series. Like, you can't really rank them. You can't really say one's better than the other. But the way it goes, I think the Lord of the Rings series is more perfect. I think the Harry Potter series, there's more of. But the Star Wars did it first, and they just have the better villain and the better character arc at the end. So that's it for me. I'll see you in the next video.